It was an ordinary morning in a small-town school where students dragged their feet into class, half awake and thinking about lunch more than lessons. The math room smelled faintly of chalk and dust, sunlight falling across the old wooden desks that had scratches from years of restless hands. The teacher walked in, holding a bundle of papers under his arm, his glasses slipping down his nose as usual. He was known for being fair but also very strict, the kind of teacher who made you sit up straight even if you didn't understand a single number on the board. That day, he looked different. There was a kind of spark in his eyes as if he had something special planned. Without saying much, he turned toward the blackboard, picked up a piece of chalk and began writing a long equation that seemed to go on forever. Lines, symbols, and numbers filled the board until it looked like a wall of confusion. When he finished, he turned to the class and said, "This is today's challenge. It's a question from an old international math test. Let's see who can solve it." The students looked at one another. Some tried to act confident, others just sighed. They were used to his special problems, the kind that looked simple but always had a twist that left everyone scratching their heads. A few brave hands went up at first, but one by one, they gave up after staring at the board for too long. The teacher smiled as if expecting that reaction. He then said he would solve it himself so everyone could learn something new. He started working step by step, writing explanations, trying different angles. The chalk squeaked against the board as he filled it again with numbers. But as the minutes passed, his confident tone started to fade. He paused, rubbed his chin, erased a line, rewrote it, then stopped again. Something wasn't adding up. The class grew silent. It was strange to see their teacher, the man who always had an answer, looking uncertain. His hand slowed, his brow furrowed, and he let out a quiet sigh. Finally, he stepped back and looked at the mess of numbers in front of him. "This one," he said softly, "might take more time than I thought." A few students exchanged awkward glances. Some whispered. One boy at the back smirked, thinking maybe the problem was impossible after all. But near the window sat a student who hadn't spoken the entire class. He wasn't one of the popular ones nor the top scorers. He kept to himself, always observing, always listening. Most of the time, teachers barely noticed him. While everyone was busy watching the teacher struggle, this quiet student had been staring at the equation, not with panic, but with curiosity. The longer he looked at it, the more he began to see something different, a pattern hidden beneath the chaos of symbols. It wasn't that he knew the answer yet. It was more that he understood how the numbers were behaving, like pieces of a puzzle that wanted to fit but were just misplaced. He reached into his bag, took out a small notebook, and started scribbling. His pencil moved fast but quietly. No one paid attention. The sound of the teacher's chalk still filled the room. The teacher tried again, taking a different approach this time, muttering to himself, explaining as he went. But again, the numbers refused to make sense. 5 minutes turned into 10. The class began to fidget. Some whispered. Some leaned back in their chairs. A few tried to sneak a look at their watches. The teacher, feeling the pressure of so many eyes, forced a smile and said, "Well, sometimes even teachers need a little time." He laughed softly, trying to keep the mood light, but everyone could tell he was stuck. The quiet student near the window looked up from his notebook. His pencil stopped moving. His eyes returned to the board, studying the teacher's half-erased steps. Something clicked in his mind. The mistake wasn't in the problem itself. It was in how everyone was looking at it. The teacher had started from the wrong end, assuming it was a regular algebraic question. But it wasn't. It was a simple pattern disguised as a hard equation. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should say anything. Speaking up wasn't his habit. But watching the teacher frown again, he felt something stir inside. Not pride, but an urge to help. Slowly, he raised his hand. The room went silent. Even the teacher looked surprised. "Yes?" he asked, almost curious. The student stood up, his voice soft but clear. "May I try it?" The class stared. No one expected that from him. The teacher, taken aback for a second, nodded with a small smile. "Of course," he said. "Come on up." The student walked to the front, holding his small notebook. He stood before the board that still carried half-erased lines of confusion. The teacher handed him the chalk. He looked at it for a second, took a breath, and then began. He didn't hesitate. He started writing slowly but confidently, skipping the unnecessary steps that everyone had been focused on. His movements were calm, his focus sharp. Line after line appeared, simple, clean, clear. The teacher leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he followed the boy's thought process. And then, within just a few seconds, 10, maybe less, the boy put down the chalk. He turned toward the class and said quietly, "That's the answer." For a moment, nobody spoke. The air in the room felt still, like time had frozen. The teacher blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Then he turned to the board. The equation that had looked impossible just minutes ago now ended neatly, the final line shining in white chalk. Clear, logical, perfect. A murmur spread through the room. Some students gasped, others whispered to one another. The teacher took a step closer, scanning each line carefully. Every step made sense. Every number matched. His lips parted slightly as he realized the boy had solved it flawlessly. He turned back, looking at the student with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "How did you—" He started but stopped midway. The boy just shrugged and said, "It was just a pattern. You only had to look from the end instead of the start." The teacher stood there for a moment, speechless. Then he smiled, a genuine smile that filled his tired face with warmth. "You're right," he said quietly. "Sometimes we look too hard when the answer is right there." The student started clapping, at first slowly, then louder. The quiet boy looked surprised at the sound. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He smiled awkwardly, almost wishing he could disappear back to his seat. But for that moment, he stood there, the quiet kid who had just done what no one else could. As the noise settled, the teacher patted him on the shoulder. "Well done," he said sincerely. "That was brilliant." The rest of the class looked at him differently after that. Some whispered to each other about how fast he had done it. Others just stared, still trying to figure out how he managed to see something the teacher couldn't. For the first time, the quiet student felt noticed, not for being invisible, not for being strange, but for something good, something real. The bell rang soon after, and everyone rushed out, still talking about what had just happened. The teacher stayed behind, staring at the board one more time. He felt a strange mix of pride and humility. He had taught for years, believed he had seen it all. But today reminded him that learning never ends, and that sometimes wisdom hides in the quietest corners of a classroom. The boy returned to his seat, packed his bag, and slipped out quietly. He didn't brag, didn't smile too wide, didn't act like a hero. He just walked down the hallway like it was any other day. But inside, something felt different. He had always doubted himself, always thought maybe he wasn't special. But today, he realized that sometimes being quiet doesn't mean you don't know. It just means you're waiting for the right moment to speak. That small moment changed something inside both the teacher and the student. The teacher learned that even experience can bow to curiosity, and the student learned that courage sometimes begins with raising a hand. Outside, the sun was bright, and the sound of laughter echoed from the playground. The world went on like nothing happened, but in that classroom, something had quietly shifted forever. A story that would soon travel through every hallway, whispered with disbelief and admiration. The day the teacher failed to solve it, and the student did it in 10 seconds. The next morning, the school felt different. It wasn't that anything had changed physically, the same desks, the same hallways, the same chatter before the bell, but the air carried a quiet buzz. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. Everyone seemed to know about the student who had solved the impossible question that even a teacher couldn't crack. Some said it was luck. Others whispered that he had memorized it somehow. But deep down, everyone knew there was something more to it. When the math teacher walked into the classroom that day, he noticed the stares. Students from other sections were standing by the doorway, pretending to pass by just to get a glimpse. The teacher gave a small smile, shook his head, and told everyone to settle down. He was still thinking about what happened yesterday. It had been years since something surprised him like that. The way the boy had handled that problem, calm, focused, no hesitation, kept replaying in his mind. He looked at the student sitting near the window, the same spot as always. The boy looked the same as before, quiet, focused, not making eye contact with anyone. It was almost as if nothing special had happened. But the teacher knew better. There was a confidence in the boy's posture now, a spark that hadn't been there before. Class began as usual. The teacher decided to give the students a few smaller problems to solve, hoping to see who was paying attention. As he walked around the room, He couldn't help glancing at the boy's notebook. Every time he noticed the same thing: clean, simple steps and quick understanding. He didn't rush, didn't show off, but his answers were always clear. After class, when most students had left, the teacher called him over. The boy hesitated for a second but walked to the desk. "You surprised me yesterday," the teacher said gently, smiling. "That question wasn't easy. In fact, I didn't expect anyone to get it." The boy just nodded, unsure how to respond. "I was just curious," he said softly. "Curious," the teacher repeated, leaning back. "That's a good word. That's where learning really begins." He paused, then added, "Do you like math?" The boy thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he said. "It's like solving a mystery. You just have to look at it differently." The teacher smiled wider. "That's exactly what I forget sometimes. We teachers explain so much that we stop looking for new ways to see things." He picked up a notebook from his desk and wrote something on it. "How about this?" he said, tearing a page and handing it to the boy. "Try this one at home. Don't worry if it takes time. Just see what you find." The boy took the paper and nodded. "Thank you, sir." That evening after dinner, he sat at the small wooden table by the window of his room. Outside, the streetlights flickered, and faint sounds of conversation came from nearby houses. He opened his notebook and looked at the new problem. It was complicated, filled with unfamiliar symbols, but something about it felt exciting. He began working on it line after line, sometimes stopping, erasing, and starting again. Hours passed quietly. When he finally got it right, he smiled to himself. Not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because the process itself made him happy. The next day, when he handed the paper back to the teacher, it was already solved perfectly. The teacher looked surprised again. "You finished it already?" "Yes, sir," the boy said. The teacher studied the solution, then looked up. "You didn't just get it right," he said slowly. "You explained it better than most textbooks do." That afternoon, the teacher went to the staff room and told a few of his colleagues what had happened. At first, they laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. But when he showed them the boy's work, they went quiet. One of them said, "Maybe you've got a prodigy in your class." The teacher just smiled and said, "Or maybe I just never noticed how much talent was sitting quietly in front of me all this time." Over the next few weeks, the boy's life in school began to change. People who had never talked to him before suddenly wanted to sit beside him. Some asked for help with homework. Others just wanted to be his friend. He was polite to everyone, but he stayed the same. Calm, soft-spoken, never showing off. One afternoon, during a free period, a group of students gathered around his desk. They placed a sheet of paper in front of him with a tricky question printed on it, something they found online, claiming even teachers couldn't solve it. They laughed and said, "Let's see if you can do this one." The boy looked at the paper quietly. The question was long, full of complicated symbols meant to confuse. He didn't say anything. Instead, he asked for a pencil, took a few seconds to look at it, and then started writing. 10 seconds later, he stopped and slid the paper back. "It's done," he said. The group went silent. They checked his work, and every step was correct. They looked at one another, amazed. "How do you do that so fast?" one of them asked. He smiled faintly. "It's not about speed. You just have to see where it begins to repeat. Once you notice that, the rest solves itself." The others didn't fully understand, but they nodded anyway, pretending they did. From that day on, they looked at him with quiet respect. Meanwhile, the teacher began giving him small challenges now and then, not as tests, but as ways to nurture his thinking. Sometimes he got them instantly. Sometimes he needed a day. But every time he came back with an answer that made perfect sense. The teacher started keeping a small file of the boy's work, thinking maybe one day he'd show it to the headmaster. One morning, the teacher was preparing for class when he received a call from the headmaster's office. When he went there, he found 2 visitors, representatives from a local education board. They were looking for talented students for a regional competition. The headmaster mentioned the boy's name immediately. The teacher's eyes lit up. "He's exactly who you're looking for," he said. The next week, the boy was called to the office. He sat quietly as they explained the competition, a math problem-solving event where students from different schools would compete to solve complex questions in front of judges. The boy listened without saying much. The idea of standing in front of a crowd made him nervous, but he agreed to try. That night, at home, he told his parents about it. They were surprised but proud. His father patted his shoulder, saying, We always knew you could do something special. Just be yourself. The days that followed were filled with quiet preparation. The teacher stayed after school to help him practice. Sometimes they would sit together in the empty classroom as the evening light faded through the windows. The teacher would watch him think, sometimes frowning, sometimes smiling, and it made him realize how passion can turn even the hardest problems into something beautiful. As the competition day approached, the boy grew nervous. He wasn't used to being in front of people. The teacher noticed and said gently, "Don't think of it as a contest. Think of it as just another problem on the board. You're not there to prove anything. You're just there to do what you already know how to do." The boy nodded. He didn't say much, but his calm smile showed he understood. When the day finally came, the classroom felt empty without him. The teacher sat at his desk waiting for updates. He didn't care if the boy won or lost. He just wanted him to feel proud of himself. By afternoon, the phone in the staff room rang. The headmaster answered it, listened for a moment, then smiled. "He did it," he said. "First place." The teacher leaned back in his chair and smiled quietly. He wasn't surprised. That evening, when the boy returned to school, tired but happy, the teacher met him at the gate. "Congratulations," he said, patting his shoulder. "You've made us all proud." The boy smiled, a little embarrassed. "Thank you, sir. I just did what you taught me, to look at things differently." The teacher laughed softly. "You did more than that," he said. "You reminded us all that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest lessons." The sun was setting behind the school building, painting the sky orange. The teacher watched as the boy walked home, his small figure disappearing down the road. For the teacher, that moment wasn't just about a student winning a prize. It was about rediscovering the joy of learning, something he thought he had lost long ago. That night, the classroom light stayed off, but the board still carried faint traces of the equation from that first day, the one that started it all. And somewhere in that soft chalk dust, the story of a quiet boy who solved the impossible was still alive. After winning the competition, everything changed faster than the quiet boy ever expected. The school that once barely noticed him now spoke his name in every hallway. Students pointed at him as he walked by, whispering to each other. Some smiled and waved. Others looked at him with envy. Teachers from different departments stopped to congratulate him. The headmaster proudly told visitors about the boy who solved what even his teacher couldn't. At first, the attention felt strange. He wasn't used to it. For so long, he had been invisible, the kind of student who could sit in the same classroom for years and still go unnoticed. But now suddenly everyone wanted to talk to him. People invited him to group projects. Others asked for his help with homework. Some even treated him like a celebrity. The teacher watched all of this with mixed feelings. Pride, joy, and a hint of worry. He had seen how quickly attention could change people, but every time he looked at the boy, he saw the same calmness. The boy still sat in his usual seat, still listened quietly, and still avoided unnecessary praise. It gave the teacher hope that the fame wouldn't affect him. One afternoon, a few weeks later, a representative from a local newspaper came to the school. They wanted to interview the boy about the competition. The teacher was asked to be there too. When they sat down for the interview, the reporter leaned forward and asked, "How did you feel when you solved that question your teacher couldn't?" The boy looked uncomfortable. He hesitated before answering. "It wasn't about who solved it," he said softly. "It was about understanding it in a different way. The teacher taught me how to look at things differently. Without that, I wouldn't have seen the answer." The teacher smiled quietly at those words. He could see that the boy wasn't just intelligent, he was humble too. The article was published a few days later with a headline that read, "The Quiet Genius Who Solved the Impossible Question." It quickly caught people's attention. Soon other schools started hearing about him. A nearby city school invited him to a workshop. The teacher accompanied him, proud to see how far he'd come. During the session, the boy was asked to solve a few problems on the board in front of a group of teachers and students. There was tension in the air. People whispered, curious to see if the stories were true. When he picked up the marker and began writing, his hand didn't shake. He stayed calm, focused. Within seconds, he completed the problem just like before. The crowd erupted into applause. Cameras clicked. The teacher stood at the side, his heart full. It wasn't about the answer anymore. It was about watching a young mind grow, not because of recognition, but because of curiosity and courage. But with the growing fame came challenges. Some students began to treat him differently, not out of kindness, but jealousy. One day, a group of boys cornered him in the hallway. "So you think you're smarter than everyone now?" one of them said, mocking his quiet tone. The boy didn't respond. He just looked down and walked away, but the words stayed with him. That night, as he sat by the window, he felt a strange heaviness. Success had made him visible, but it had also made him a target. The teacher noticed his silence in class the next day. After everyone left, he called him over. "You've been quiet lately," the teacher said softly. "Something on your mind?" The boy hesitated, then said, "Sometimes I think people liked me better when they didn't notice me." The teacher leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Fame is strange," he said. "It can make people see you differently. But what matters isn't how they see you. It's how you stay the same. You didn't solve that question to impress anyone. You did it because you were curious. Don't let the noise change that." The boy nodded slowly. He understood. The teacher's words always had a way of settling his thoughts. As the months passed, his reputation continued to grow. He was invited to more events, sometimes traveling with his teacher to nearby cities for exhibitions and academic fairs. Each time he stayed humble, speaking little, letting his work speak for him. The teacher, watching from the side, felt proud, not just because of his intelligence, but because of his heart. One day, the school received a letter from the National Education Board. They had heard about the boy and wanted him to participate in a national-level academic competition. The headmaster gathered everyone in the staff room to announce it. The teacher felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was a much bigger stage. The competition would include the best students from across the country, each one brilliant, confident, and competitive. When the teacher told the boy about it, the boy looked thoughtful. "It sounds big," he said quietly. "It is," the teacher replied, "but don't let that scare you. Just be yourself. You have something rare, not just knowledge, but patience and focus. That's what makes you different." The boy nodded. "I'll try." In the days leading up to the event, the teacher helped him prepare. They stayed after school, working through old problems, exploring new ones. Sometimes they didn't even talk. They just sat together, thinking silently, sharing the same space of concentration. Those moments reminded the teacher why he had chosen to teach in the first place: to witness growth, to see curiosity come alive. When the day of the national competition arrived, the boy and his teacher took an early train to the city. The journey was long and quiet. The teacher could tell the boy was nervous. "Remember," he said gently, "you're not here to prove you're better. You're here because you love solving things others give up on." The boy smiled slightly. "I'll remember that." The competition hall was large and bright, filled with students from elite schools, each wearing neat uniforms and badges. The boy felt small among them. Some looked at him curiously when they heard which school he came from, a small town far from the big cities. But the teacher's reassuring nod gave him strength. When the event began, the first round went smoothly. He solved the questions easily. In the second round, things grew harder and he had to think longer. But his calmness helped him. He stayed focused while others rushed. In the final round, one question stumped nearly everyone, a complex, logical puzzle that even the judges whispered about. The boy looked at it for a long time, then took a deep breath. Something about it reminded him of that first problem, the one he had solved in 10 seconds. He smiled faintly and began to write. Step by step, the pattern revealed itself. Within moments, his page was complete. When time was up, the judges collected the papers. As they checked, a quiet stir spread through the room. The teacher, sitting among the audience, noticed the smiles of the evaluators. He knew something good had happened. When the results were announced, the boy's name came first. The hall filled with applause. The teacher clapped too, but he didn't shout or cheer. He just looked at the boy, who stood there quietly, accepting the certificate with his usual calm smile. After the ceremony, the teacher found him outside, standing alone, watching the sunset. "You did it again," the teacher said, placing a hand on his shoulder. The boy looked up. "It felt just like the first time," he said softly. "Everything went quiet in my head and then I just saw it," the teacher smiled. "That's your gift," he said. not just knowing but seeing. As they took the train back home, neither of them spoke much. The teacher looked out the window, thinking about how far this journey had come, from a simple classroom challenge to a national stage. But what touched him most wasn't the victory. It was the boy's heart. Still humble, still grounded, still curious. That night, when the train reached the station, the boy's parents were waiting with tears in their eyes. They hugged him, their pride overflowing. The teacher stood nearby, smiling. For him, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something greater. And as they all walked home together under the dim streetlights, the teacher realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes, greatness doesn't arrive with loud applause or bright lights. Sometimes it begins quietly in a classroom, when a student dares to raise a hand and see what everyone else has missed. When the boy returned to school after winning the national competition, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The principal announced his victory during the morning assembly, and students clapped until their hands hurt. Even those who barely knew him joined in, shouting his name proudly. He stood there, feeling both shy and grateful, wishing he could quietly slip back to his classroom. The teacher stood nearby, smiling with quiet pride. Watching him receive the applause filled his heart with warmth. He remembered that first day when the boy had raised his hand to solve the problem no one else could. It felt like a lifetime ago. The teacher had seen him grow, from a quiet observer to someone whose calm mind amazed everyone. In the days that followed, the boy's life became busier than he ever imagined. He was invited to different schools, events, and even local TV interviews. Cameras flashed, people asked questions, and everyone wanted to know his secret. Some called him a genius. Others said he had a gift from birth, but every time someone asked him about it, he gave the same gentle reply. "It's not a gift," he would say. "It's just curiosity and patience." Still, fame had a way of changing the world around him. His classmates began to treat him differently. Some genuinely admired him and wanted to learn from him, but others kept their distance, feeling overshadowed. The teacher could see how this silent shift affected him. One afternoon, the teacher found him sitting alone in the library, surrounded by books. "You've been quiet lately," the teacher said softly, sitting beside him. The boy looked up from his notebook. "I just feel like people don't see me the same anymore," he said. "Before I was just another student. Now it feels like everything I do has to be perfect. If I make a mistake, people will say I'm not as smart as they thought." The teacher nodded slowly. "That's the weight of expectations," he said. "It comes when people see something special in you. But remember, perfection doesn't make you great. Honesty does. Keep being yourself. The rest will follow." The boy smiled faintly. "You always make it sound simple," he said. "Because it is," the teacher replied. "We just make it complicated." Over time, the teacher noticed something else. The boy's way of thinking had begun to inspire others. Students who once gave up easily started staying after class to ask questions. The boy often stayed behind to help them, explaining in his calm, patient way. He never made anyone feel less intelligent. In fact, his kindness made others believe that maybe they could solve hard problems too. The teacher loved watching this. It was like a ripple effect. One moment of brilliance spreading into dozens of small sparks. He realized the boy's biggest gift wasn't solving problems fast. It was making others believe they could too. Months passed, and soon the school received another letter, this time from an international foundation that offered scholarships to talented students. The boy's achievements had reached far beyond the small town. They wanted him to attend a science and math program abroad. When the teacher told him, the boy was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "That's very far away." "Yes," the teacher said quietly, "but it's also a door that might change your future." The boy looked thoughtful. "I've never been outside the country," he said. "I don't even know if I'll fit in there." The teacher smiled. "You'll fit anywhere curiosity lives," he said. The language of learning doesn't need translation. The next few weeks were filled with preparations. The school arranged paperwork. The principal held a farewell ceremony, and even the local newspaper printed a story titled, "From Small Town Classroom to International Stage." During the ceremony, the teacher gave a short speech. He said, When I first met him, he was just another student sitting quietly by the window. I never imagined that quietness could hold so much strength. What I've learned from him is something every teacher should remember. Never underestimate silence. Sometimes it hides brilliance waiting to be seen. The hall filled with applause. The boy stood beside the teacher looking down shyly, but inside his heart was full. A few days later, it was time for him to leave. His parents came to the train station carrying small bags of food and gifts. The teacher stood with them, holding an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. He handed it to the boy, saying, "Read this when you reach." The train whistle blew and they hugged one last time. The teacher watched as the train moved away, carrying his student toward a future full of unknown possibilities. He stood there long after it disappeared from sight, feeling proud and a little lonely. When the boy reached the new country, everything felt different. The air, the streets, the people. The classrooms were bigger, the technology advanced, the accents unfamiliar. For the first few weeks, he struggled to adjust. He missed home, his old school, and the familiar voice of his teacher. Sometimes he would sit by the dorm window at night, thinking of the quiet math room where it all began. One evening, feeling homesick, he finally opened the envelope the teacher had given him. Inside was a simple note. It read, "Remember, no matter how far you go, learning is not a race. Stay kind, stay curious, and never let success silence your humility. Proud of you, always." He smiled, reading it again and again. The words stayed with him through every challenge. In his new school, he quickly caught attention again, not because he was trying to, but because of how he thought. His teachers admired his ability to see things differently. His classmates respected how he helped others understand difficult topics. Once again, he became known for solving problems that others found impossible, not by speed this time, but by understanding. Back home, his old teacher continued his work as usual. But sometimes, when the classroom grew quiet, he would glance at the empty seat near the window and smile. That empty chair had once held a story that still inspired him every day. Whenever new students struggled, he would tell them about a boy who once solved an impossible problem in 10 seconds. Not to make them feel small, but to remind them that brilliance begins with belief. Months later, a letter arrived for the teacher. It was from the boy. The handwriting was neat and familiar. It said, "Dear sir, I wanted to tell you that everything you taught me still guides me every day. I've learned new things, met wonderful people, and faced challenges too. But every time I feel lost, I remember what you said. That curiosity is stronger than fear. I'm working on a research project now, something I never thought I could do. It's not about being the fastest anymore. It's about finding new ways to understand things. Thank you for seeing something in me when no one else did. I'll come visit soon." The teacher read the letter twice, his eyes soft with pride. He folded it carefully and kept it inside his desk drawer, next to the piece of chalk he had used on the day everything began. That evening, as the sun set behind the school building, he sat in the empty classroom, thinking about how life had changed for both of them. A small moment, one raised hand, one question. It had started a journey that neither of them could have predicted. He realized that teaching wasn't about giving answers. It was about lighting a spark that could burn long after the classroom doors closed. The boy had taken that spark and turned it into a flame that now reached across oceans. Months turned into a year, and news came that the boy had completed his international program with top honors. The school celebrated again, though he wasn't there in person. They hung his photo in the main hallway with a small note underneath that read, "He believed differently, and somewhere far away." In a busy city filled with bright lights and tall buildings, the boy stood at his window one night, looking out at the stars. In his mind, he saw the small chalkboard from his old classroom, the board where his life had quietly changed forever. He smiled softly, whispering to himself, "It all started with one question." Years passed, and time quietly changed everything. The old school got a new coat of paint. The trees in the courtyard grew taller, and many students came and went through those same classrooms. The teacher was still there, though his hair had turned gray and his steps had slowed. But his eyes still carried the same calm energy, the same curiosity that once sparked a young boy's future. Every morning, he arrived before everyone else, opening the classroom windows to let in the fresh air. He still used chalk instead of digital boards, saying it made him feel connected to the lessons. Sometimes he would pause before writing on the board, remembering the moment that changed everything, the day his student solved the impossible question in 10 seconds. It had been years since that day, but it never left his heart. It wasn't just about the solution. It was about what it meant, that knowledge doesn't always come from books and brilliance can bloom in silence. He often wondered where his student was now. The last letter he received had been years ago, talking about research and projects. Life had gotten busy for both of them, and communication slowly faded. Still, he never stopped believing that someday they would meet again. One chilly winter morning, as he sat in the staff room sipping tea, the principal walked in holding a large envelope. "This came for you," the principal said with a small smile. The teacher looked up curiously and opened it. Inside was a formal-looking letter printed neatly, with a university logo at the top. As he read, his hands began to tremble slightly. Not from age, but from emotion. The letter said that the boy, now a grown man, had been selected for a Global Science Award for his research on developing faster, energy-efficient computing systems. It was one of the highest honors in his field. At the bottom of the letter was a short personal note written by him. "Dear Sir, I am receiving this award next month. It would mean the world to me if you could attend. Nothing I've achieved would have been possible without you. You taught me that thinking differently isn't wrong, it's necessary. Please come. I've already arranged everything." The teacher put the letter down and sat quietly for a long time. Then slowly a smile appeared on his face, the kind of smile that comes from deep pride. When the day of the event arrived, he packed a small bag, wore his best suit, and took an early train to the city. It had been years since he traveled this far, but every mile felt worth it. As the train moved past the fields and towns, memories of the past came rushing back. The classroom, the laughter, the quiet moments of learning. The event hall was grand, filled with people in formal clothes, bright lights, and large screens showing the achievements of scientists from around the world. The teacher sat quietly in the audience, his heart beating faster with every passing minute. When the announcer finally called the young man's name, the room erupted in applause. The teacher looked up at the stage and saw him, taller, confident, and surrounded by people. But behind all that, the teacher could still see the same calm spark in his eyes. The young man stepped to the microphone and began his speech. He spoke about innovation, curiosity, and hard work. Then his voice softened as he said, "But before anything else, I want to thank the person who taught me to believe in my own way of thinking. My school teacher. He's here today, sitting somewhere in this audience. Sir, this is as much your award as it is mine." The hall went silent for a moment, and then everyone turned toward where the teacher sat. The young man gestured for him to come to the stage. The teacher hesitated, feeling shy under all those lights, but the applause encouraged him. Slowly, he walked toward the stage, his eyes shining with tears he didn't try to hide. When he reached the podium, the young man hugged him tightly. Not like a student greeting a teacher, but like a son returning home after many years. "Sir," the young man said softly, "I've wanted to do this for a long time." The teacher could barely speak. He simply patted his shoulder and whispered, "I always knew you would make it." The audience stood and clapped again, but for the teacher this time. Cameras flashed, reporters took photos, but he barely noticed any of it. His heart was full. He didn't need recognition. Seeing his student achieve something meaningful was enough. After the ceremony, they sat together in a quiet corner of the hall, away from the noise. The young man ordered 2 cups of tea and smiled. "Do you remember when I solved that math question and you just stared at me?" The teacher laughed softly. "I do. I remember thinking, this boy just changed how I see teaching." "I was scared that day," the young man said. "I thought you'd be angry that I interrupted your class." "I wasn't angry," the teacher said. "I was amazed. You didn't just solve the problem. You showed me that teaching is a two-way street. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher." They talked for hours, sharing stories of what had happened since they last met. The young man told him about his research, his travels, and how he often thought of the small classroom with its old chalkboard. He said that even now, whenever he faced a hard problem, he imagined himself sitting in that room, hearing his teacher's calm voice asking, "What if we think about it differently?" When the evening came to an end, the young man insisted on driving the teacher back to his hotel. As they stood outside, the teacher looked at the bright city lights and said quietly, "You've done well, my boy. But remember, no matter how high you go, stay close to the ground." The young man nodded. "I will, sir." That's the first thing you ever taught me." That night in his hotel room, the teacher couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the day in his mind. The applause, the speech, the hug. It all felt like a beautiful dream. He realized that this was what every teacher hoped for. Not fame, not rewards, but the quiet joy of knowing they had made a lasting difference in someone's life. The next morning, before leaving the city, the teacher visited a small bookstore. He bought a simple notebook and wrote on the first page, "To every student who ever felt unseen, remember, one day your light will shine. Be patient. Someone will notice." He planned to keep it on his classroom desk, hoping one of his new students would find it someday. When he returned to the school, everyone wanted to hear about the trip. The principal congratulated him, and the students looked at him with admiration. But he didn't boast. He just smiled and said, "It was a proud day, for all of us." From that day on, the story of the teacher and the 10-second student became something of a legend in the school. Every new class heard about it. It wasn't told as a story of genius, but as a lesson about faith. The kind of faith a teacher can have in a student, and how one small moment can change everything. Years later, when the teacher finally retired, the young man, now a respected scientist and educator, returned to the school again. The principal invited him to speak at the farewell ceremony. Standing at the front of the classroom where it all began, he looked around. The walls were freshly painted, but the old chalkboard was still there. He walked to it, picked up a piece of chalk, and drew the same equation his teacher had written all those years ago, the one no one could solve. Then he smiled, turned to the crowd and said, "This is where I learned that the world isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about daring to ask new questions." The teacher sat quietly in the front row, eyes moist, heart full. He knew this was the perfect ending, not just for their story, but for every story of learning and belief. As the ceremony ended, the young man walked over, handed him a small box and said, "This is for you." Inside was a golden pen with an engraving that read, "For the man who taught me how to think." The teacher smiled, holding back tears. "I think you've done enough to thank me already," he said. "Not even close," the young man replied with a grin. When the crowd left and the room grew quiet, the teacher looked at the chalkboard one last time. The sunlight hit it softly, just like it had years ago. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote beneath the equation, "He solved it in 10 seconds and changed a life forever." He placed the chalk down gently, took one last look at the room, and walked out with a peaceful heart. Outside, the young man waited for him. They walked together down the familiar school path, talking and laughing, two friends bound not by age or title, but by respect and a teacher and a student, forever connected by one unforgettable moment. And as they disappeared down the quiet road, the sun dipped behind the trees, leaving behind a golden glow, the same color as the chalk dust that once floated through a small classroom, where a simple question had changed everything. Years passed quietly after the teacher retired. The school carried on as it always had, but something in its walls felt different. The classroom where he had once taught stood at the end of the corridor, still filled with sunlight during the mornings. Students often peeked inside and spoke softly about the stories they had heard, about the old teacher, the impossible question, and the boy who solved it in 10 seconds. The chalkboard was still there. On it, faintly visible even after many cleanings, were the words he had written years ago. He solved it in 10 seconds and changed a life forever. The cleaning staff had tried to erase it many times, but no matter how hard they wiped, the line always seemed to faintly return. Eventually, they stopped trying. It had become a quiet part of the school's soul. The teacher, now living a peaceful life in a small house near the fields, spent his days reading, tending to his small garden, and sometimes tutoring children from the neighborhood. He didn't charge money. He said teaching wasn't about earning, it was about giving back. Parents loved him, children adored him, and everyone in town knew him as the wise man with the kind eyes. Every morning he followed the same routine. He'd make tea, open the window to let in the breeze, and sit by the wooden table with his notebook. Sometimes he'd write small thoughts about life and learning. Other times he'd sketch the faces of students he remembered, the ones who had made teaching worthwhile. But there was one student he thought about more than any other, the boy who had once solved an impossible problem and reminded him what true learning meant. Though they had met several times since, Life had again carried them in different directions. The boy had become a man known around the world, giving talks, leading research, inspiring young minds. His work wasn't just about math anymore. It was about changing how people thought. He often spoke about creativity, patience, and the importance of learning from mistakes. But no matter how far he went, he never forgot his roots. In every speech, he mentioned the teacher who believed in him before anyone else did. It became almost a tradition. People would wait for that part of his speech, the part where his voice softened and he said, "Everything I am began in a small classroom with a teacher who refused to give up on me." One afternoon, years after the retirement, the teacher received a phone call. His old student was coming back to town again, not for a visit this time, but for something bigger. The city wanted to name a new learning center after him, and he had requested that the ceremony be held at their old school. When the teacher heard the news, he smiled quietly. He hasn't changed, he said to himself, still bringing the world back home. A week later, the school grounds were filled with people, students, teachers, reporters, even officials. There were banners, cameras, and a stage built in front of the main hall. The teacher, now frail but still standing tall, was given a seat in the front row. When the car arrived, everyone stood up. The grown man stepped out, still with that same calm smile that once lit up the classroom. As soon as he saw his old teacher, he walked straight toward him, not caring about the cameras or crowd. He knelt down beside the chair, took the teacher's hands in his, and said softly, "Sir, I kept my promise. I told you I'd bring something back here one day." The teacher chuckled lightly. "You've already brought enough, my boy," he said. "You brought pride." The ceremony began and the new Center for Innovative Learning was officially opened. The young man gave his speech, but instead of standing on the big stage, he invited his teacher to join him. Together they stood side by side as he spoke. He said, "When I was a child, I thought solving problems was about finding answers. But this man taught me that the real meaning of knowledge is to never stop questioning. He showed me that kindness is the greatest form of intelligence and belief is the strongest kind of teaching. So this center, though it carries my name, belongs to him, and to every teacher who ever believed in their students." The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The teacher stood quietly, eyes glistening, and said into the microphone, "All I did was ask a question one day. He's the one who answered it with his life." Later, after the crowd dispersed, the two sat on a bench near the old playground. Children ran around laughing just like they had decades ago. The air smelled of dust and flowers, and the sound of the bell echoed faintly from the hallway. "It feels the same," the teacher said. "Nothing's really changed." "Maybe that's a good thing," the young man said. "Some things should never change." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunlight flicker through the trees. Then the teacher said softly, "You've done everything I ever hoped for. You've gone further than I ever could." The young man shook his head. "No, sir. I only walked the path you showed me." As the day drew to an end, the young man helped the teacher back to his car. Before leaving, the teacher said, "Promise me something." "Anything," the young man replied. "When it's your turn to teach," the teacher said, "teach them not to be afraid of being different. Remind them that failure is just another kind of learning. And above all, never stop asking questions." "I promise," the young man said, his voice steady but emotional. He hugged the teacher one last time before the car door closed. The teacher watched as it drove away down the dusty road, just like years ago when he had sent off the same boy on a train toward a new life. Only this time the goodbye felt peaceful, complete. Months later, the teacher's health began to fade. He spent more time resting, still keeping his books and chalkboard nearby. One morning, a neighbor came to visit and found a note on his desk. It was written neatly in his familiar handwriting. It said, "Teaching ends in the classroom, but learning never ends." I was lucky to see both sides, as a teacher and as a student. That evening, the teacher quietly passed away in his sleep, with a gentle smile on his face.